When it comes to resolution, the higher the target resolution, the more work a GPU has to do for each and every frame of animation. Conversely though, if you're targeting a higher frame rate, you have less time to do that work. So 60 FPS gives you half the amount of time to render a frame versus 30 FPS, which, well, you can see the trade-off there. This is one of the reasons that 30 FPS experiences still exist in consoles. Despite the fact that developers are telling you that it's for the cinematic look, the reality is it's, well, just a performance choice. There are other options, of course, available. One of those is to dynamically adjust the internal rendered resolution depending on how busy a scene is. So let's say there's not much going on, it might be native 4K, whereas if there's tons of action and lots of stuff happening on screen, it might be just 1600p. And this is combined with newer things such as reconstruction technology and machine learning and upsampling.
Reconstruction technology is an extensive subject, and we'll largely be ignoring non-machine learning tech such as checkerboard rendering, which is a reconstruction method heavily used in the PS4 Pro. It actually had changes in its GPU architecture to help accelerate this. Reconstruction tech, though, was extensively used throughout last generation, with Killzone Shadowfall offering a form of temporal reconstruction on the PS4's launch. We actually covered this back in the day. But for this coverage, we'll focus our attention on much of the confusion between the differences caused by the next generation of consoles and PC, predominantly the differences between Nvidia's DLSS, deep learning supersampling, and AMD's upcoming tech, FidelityFX supersampling, and Microsoft's tech, DirectML. I will proceed with the assumption you're not too familiar with Nvidia's DLSS technology, so I'll explain it briefly here, although I've given this much more coverage in my Native Resolution is Dead video, which you can find linked in the video description. So, let's start out with the very basics. DLSS, Deep Learning Supersampling, is Nvidia's own solution. To be absolutely abundantly clear, anyone saying that the PlayStation 5 or Xbox has DLSS is not correct in the technical sense. Even if they are referencing these consoles having machine learning AI upsampling. There was even a patent from Sony detailing machine learning on the PS5, which many websites incorrectly reported in a couple of ways. The first is that they were stating that the patent was implying that it was for upsampling, when this patent was not for upsampling. Instead, it was machine learning for a camera, basically figuring out what the individual who the camera was looking at was doing for some type of control, it looked like. The second is that DLSS is Nvidia's proprietary name and its own upsampling technology, its own framework. This is not something that a console can run. Again, it is Nvidia's. DLSS works by Nvidia's GPU running code on the GeForce's Tensor cores. Tensor cores are very good at a specific type of math. Don't worry about what that math is, it's really not important for this. This is run basically alongside the GPU's CUDA cores. With Nvidia's tech, we have training and inference. With training, high-resolution comparison footage is used as a reference to upsample lower-resolution gameplay. This is done until DLSS knows how to upsample from say 1440p to 4K. Once this code is trained, inference, i.e. running the trained code, is way less taxing. And rather than needing a supercomputer, it can be done on your home GeForce graphics card. So the GeForce's CUDA cores can focus on actually, rendering the game itself. And then, as you can see in these images, the tensor cores take up a portion of the time for each frame, where the machine learning algorithm upsamples the output to the final image which is shown on screen. The Xbox Series X, and I'll say Xbox Series X throughout this video because I'll end up in an asylum if I keep having to say Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S, the PlayStation 5 and AMD's own GPUs, well, they do not have Nvidia's tensor cores at all. They are not present on the silicon, on the Xbox, on the PlayStation, or any AMD GPU. There is no tensor cores. But this is not a problem because they have their own solutions.
Now, I want you to just sit right there and I'm going to tell you how I came to these conclusions I'm about to lay bare. Now, I looked at several documents. I'm going to really suffer from that one with clips, aren't I? Anyway, yeah, so unfortunately, AMD are yet to provide any real information to how FidelityFX supersampling works. And by any real information, well, basically anything that's conclusive at all. With that said, with a little bit of official documentation and some of my own sources, plus as well some logical conclusions, we can probably get a basic understanding of how this tech works, and then we can start to draw some parallels and some differences with how it compares to, let's say, DirectML from Microsoft and also Nvidia's DLSS technology.
For example, Microsoft's DirectML can run on Xbox Series consoles, and also DirectML can upsample the image, but we'll discuss DirectML further in just a moment. Regarding AMD's FidelityFX super resolution technology, speaking to a source, and I've reported this in a video, it seems that FidelityFX supersampling is a continuation of their FidelityFX tech, but uses a small dosage of machine learning closer to the end of the creation of the frame. To add to this, other sources have told me that 1. This is not going to be ready in the next few weeks or anything like that, backed up by yet another source who has told me that this is just going out to developers in alpha now. And let's face it, alpha software is not exactly free of bugs and close to release at the best of times. Further, 2 people have told me it is not a driver toggle. To be clear what I mean here, it needs to be integrated into the game engine and supported by the developer. So if a game is already out on PC, let's say Doom Eternal, no reason why, let's just pick it out of thin air, and Doom Eternal is not updated to take advantage of this in the engine's code, the tech will not be present. You can simply not go to the GPU's control panel, press a button, and Bob's your uncle. Again, the developer needs to code this. So let's assume that this is true. Well, likelihood is that on AMD-sponsored PC titles, or possibly for games which are released on all 3, we could see AMD's tech used. But I do know that Nvidia will definitely be pushing back very hard with DLSS. Given Nvidia have recently released a plugin for Unreal Engine for DLSS, I don't think it takes a genius to figure that this is also going to be implemented in Unity Engine as well. And AMD, well, they will of course continue to push as well. There's a few things here. Nvidia faces increased competition from AMD. DLSS is now working on professional applications, something I hinted at several times if you've watched the channel for a while. AMD will have their own solution, which of course is necessitating Nvidia to continue to push DLSS since it's been one of Nvidia's USPs, and the Switch Pro, whatever it ends up being called, is apparently going to use DLSS for upsampling to 4K. Since I leaked details about the Switch Pro last year using an updated Nvidia SoC with tensor cores, other websites and other sources seem to have confirmed it is real. Again, this easy plugin solution for Unreal Engine will be of great importance for Switch games since UE is so integrated into modern-day game development. This also makes sense because, to my understanding, RDNA 3's ray tracing performance is significantly better than RDNA 2. I've already leaked that Nvidia still seems to be ahead though with Lovelace. Nvidia does seem to focus its main USP though ahead as DLSS. I don't believe that RDNA 3 though does use dedicated units for upsampling like Nvidia does, despite the recently discovered patent for an MLA machine learning accelerator, which basically can be thought of as a chiplet version for Nvidia's Tensor Core. According to what I was told, this chiplet is not going to be present on Navi 31 or 32, both of which consist of 3 chiplets, 2 housing compute units and other GPU stuff, such as say texture mapping units, and the 3rd chiplet being for I/O. You can think of this as roughly the same layout as, let's say, Zen 3 and the Ryzen 9 5950X. I've discussed this stuff extensively previously, including Navi 3X performance targets in a separate video, which I'll link in the video description. I also cover things like Lovelace and Intel Xe. But yeah, I just wanted to say that according to what I know, RDNA 3 does not have a dedicated chiplet or cores or whatever to handle upsampling. Instead, AMD wished to use a scalable and flexible GPU nature, believing it's the best use of silicon space. So now comes to the confusing part. How does AMD's tech, super resolution, actually work, and how does it compare against Nvidia's DLSS or Microsoft's DirectML? Well, I had it explained to me that it does seem to leverage 4 and 8-bit operations on the GPU for RDNA 2 architecture, but then another really good source who has leaked, well, they've leaked a ton of stuff to me which has been 100% accurate. I won't specify what for obvious reasons in a video, but they told me it definitely does work with RDNA 1 2, and AMD is internally seeing double performance for games, although they didn't specify how they were seeing double the performance. More on that in just a moment. I really want to get into DirectML, but we really need to discuss this just for a moment longer, as it leaves us with a few possibilities. The first is that the above information is not correct, and it does require RDNA 2 or later to function. The second possibility is that the information is correct, but it doesn't use lower precision operations to function. The third possibility is that the information is correct and RDNA 2 does use lower precision operations, but on RDNA 1 it still uses 16-bit or some other code path and is less performant. Given these possibilities, I tend to believe that number 3 is more likely to be right, given the latest source told me that even on RDNA 1 it does use machine learning. So it also seems that the code takes a much smaller portion of time, at least equivalent to DLSS would if it was running on the tensor cores. We know for certain RDNA 1 does not have 4 and 8-bit operations. In fact, you can see yourself right here in AMD's own white paper. I won't go through the whole thing, as, well, reading these operations is kind of boring, but you can see yourself on screen, and if you're a programmer, you'll instantly recognize what's going on here. It clearly states the big changes for RDNA 2, along with hardware-based ray tracing, are the aforementioned operations listed, and these basically mirror the operations of Nvidia's tensor cores. In fact, in an interview with Eurogamer, you can see that Microsoft requested these lower precision operations to be added to the Xbox Series X GPU, known as RDNA, and these, of course, will also be present on the Series S too. Given what we're piecing together here, it's likely Microsoft asked for these instructions to be added to their GPU, and AMD plonked them into RDNA 2 as a general IP. I mean, it would make sense given Sony and Microsoft have influenced AMD's roadmap in the past several times. Again, I could be wrong, but the evidence here is pretty compelling. Also, since the PlayStation 5's compute units are apparently RDNA 2 based, although other aspects of the GPU are not RDNA 2 based, such as, for example, the geometry engines, which are Sony's own design, we could probably assume that in the best case scenario, Sony could leverage lower precision operations, which I think the PS5 would have, or in worst case, it would operate more like RDNA 1, using, say, 16-bit operations. Again, this is assuming my info on FidelityFX super resolution is accurate and it does run on RDNA 2. I'm not a betting man by nature, but I have had it told to me that Sony does support lower precision operations. So if the compute units are RDNA 2, as Sony, AMD and DiceShots seem to indicate, and various PS5 machine learning patterns, yeah, maybe. But until we got confirmation one way or another, honestly, it's just a mystery. Also, I'd like to just focus on the twice the performance thing for just one more moment before we get into DirectML. Up to twice the performance of a native image, well, it's impressive in theory, but twice the performance is also a very loose claim, and could mean frame rate or a different measurement that we don't really know. And we also don't understand yet the resolution it's capable of upsampling from or to. For example, could it go from 1080p to 4K, or would it need a higher resolution base, such as, let's say, 1440p? Furthermore, what about the quality? How does it compare against Nvidia's DLSS 2? Also, while we're really focusing on this, if it does work on RDNA 1 and 2, well, what is the performance difference between them? To put this another way, an RX 5700 XT and 6700 XT are similar-ish in spec. With the RDNA 2 based card, of course, it runs at higher clock frequencies, better IPC and that type of stuff, but still 40 compute units and all of that. So what happens if it's using the lower precision operations, let's say 4 or 8-bit? Would it be 100% faster at a certain resolution, and the 5700 XT being 50% faster? Again, I'm just making up percentages here, so don't take that as a leak. It's me asking questions, just to say that we don't know this stuff.
My personal opinion is most likely AMD are not using a machine training and inference method with FidelityFX. I believe instead it's most likely, as my source stated, using kind of a combination of their older technology and then a very small amount of machine learning to improve the image at the end of the upsampling process. That's how it was explained to me, and quite frankly, I don't think it fits with AMD's modus operandi to use like supercomputers to compare against reference like 16K images, which is what Nvidia does with its training and inference model. Now, I might be wrong on this, but again, I don't think I am. I believe that instead AMD are going quite a different route to Nvidia, and it will be extraordinarily interesting to see what the visual differences are. I've heard a lot that it's not quite as good visually as DLSS, but that information is quite old now. It was coming like kind of latter part of 2020, so things can change pretty rapidly, as I'm sure you're aware. So again, I'm not going to comment on the visuals other than to say that they used to be worse than DLSS to my knowledge, but things can change really quickly. I mean, look, DLSS 1 is nowhere near as good as DLSS 2. So, it is important to take that into consideration.
Let's take FidelityFX and move it aside, and let's climb aboard the DirectML choo-choo train. Choo-choo! Seems like a good plan, as we haven't even explained this worth a damn yet, and we're already, way past 15 minutes into the video? Microsoft's DirectML has been a project Microsoft have been working on for a number of years, and first shown off their work with DirectML upsampling in SIGGRAPH 2018. This was using Nvidia's then new and shiny architectures running on the GPU's Tensor cores. During this presentation, they were showing Forza and upsampling the game from 1080p to 4K, and showed some gameplay of it too. The results, despite it being old code, it looked pretty promising, honestly. Like, look at what's going on with the number plates, for example. But to get a little more technical for a moment, I don't want to get super deep into this, but yeah, I think we need to at least tackle this one thing. DirectML is not just upsampling tech. It would be like me saying that Direct3D is just for a generation of a triangle. Yeah, Direct3D is not just for triangle generation. DirectML is a machine learning framework. That last word is very important, framework, and it can be used for a host of different things, depending on the game, the application, and what developers want. I'll leave a link into Nvidia's and Microsoft's SIGGRAPH conference. It does get pretty technical, along with some links to Microsoft's own pages on DirectML. But yeah, basically they stated in their conference, that is SIGGRAPH, that this code was running on Nvidia's Tensor cores. But modern GPUs which have tensor cores are not a requirement, and it could fall back to the compute units, or I guess in Nvidia's case it would be CUDA cores of a GPU, or even the CPU. In reality, for the Xbox, this is almost never going to occur. I mean, maybe if you had the spare CPU power, but almost inevitably it would run on the GPU's either 4 or 8-bit operations exclusively. Again, these essentially mirror the tensor core functionality. Because they're lower precision operations, you can run more of them simultaneously per shader. So the amount of TOPS is directly proportional to this. The simple way to think of this is that an 8-bit operation could complete on the same shader in about a quarter of the time as a full precision 32-bit float. Ultimately, Microsoft haven't used their tech in the Xbox Series titles as of yet. but they will show it soon, I suspect. Microsoft haven't actually shown any games off right now that even use mesh shaders. I recently covered that Microsoft's mesh shaders are a fundamental shift in the geometry pipeline paradigm. And again, games using mesh shaders are not released yet on the Xbox. They are coming though this year. I would encourage you to check out the video if you want more on that. But let's get to the topic itself, or at least back to it. Microsoft also declares DirectML can be used during bubbles in the graphics pipeline, and this obviously means that it can make better use of the Xbox Series X's GPU. If you've followed the channel for any length of time, you'll know that I've said multiple times that while the Xbox does have more compute power over the PlayStation 5, well, it also is a wider GPU, which means you can get bubbles in the pipeline. Long term, this is not going to be a problem. Developers will leverage this, and machine learning is one way to do it. And it will be very interesting to see how the Xbox's GPU is used in 2 or 3 years' time with complicated compute shaders, mesh shaders, DirectML, and everything else just running harmoniously on the GPU. Given DirectML can create awesome AI, upsampling technology, and a host of other possibilities, there's a ton of potential here. And of course, this framework will run too on Windows-based PCs, but how it works exactly will likely depend on the GPU itself. For example, if you have an older Intel integrated GPU, well, yeah, it's going to be a bit different from a high-performance Nvidia or AMD GPU, or indeed Intel's upcoming Intel Xe, which are looking rather promising, at least in my opinion.
With any luck, this video has helped to alleviate some of the confusion around the tech. Unfortunately, Microsoft have not really shown us too much on DirectML for games. I do suspect that Xbox titles are going to benefit very heavily from it. But again, while it can be used for upsampling visuals, it can be used for so much more, including improvements in AI, which that's always a good thing, right? I mean, more realistic behaving opponents in games, that could be absolutely awesome. As for FidelityFX, super sampling, it's going to be a tool in the toolkit just like any other tech. And it does seem to benefit from being able to run on PlayStation, Xbox, and AMD's own graphics cards. The thing is though, until we actually see how it stacks up visually, it's very difficult to know, just like DirectML. I mean, yeah, we've seen the Forza demo, of course, that I've shown several times in this video, but at the end of the day, A, that was a very controlled demo, and B, that's also kind of old now. I'm sure they've improved things considerably since then. As for Nvidia, they're going to continue to do their thing, pushing DLSS and their own technology. The good thing about Nvidia is they've got the cash to actually throw into these neural networks and these supercomputers, and that obviously, at least at the moment, just isn't something that AMD can really, do. I think that DLSS is going to continue to evolve in visual quality, particularly now that professionals are also starting to take an interest in it. It'll be very interesting to see what happens by the time Lovelace launches, which I believe is going to be next year. AD102 has already been leaked to be about 70, or just over 70% more in terms of CUDA cores. And as I also leaked in a video, the performance of this thing is looking to be very good. Well, RDNA 3 has a performance target of about 2.5 times faster than RDNA 2, at least according to my info. Yeah, it doesn't seem Nvidia too worried about that. So that gives you an idea of the performance we're dealing with these next generation, desktop GPUs. But even so, to run games at high resolution, let's say 4K, with all of the bells and whistles enabled, including hardware-based ray tracing, it's incredibly taxing on the graphics chip. So even then, I do feel that a good upsampling solution is going to be mandatory. And also, not everyone can afford an RTX 3080 or equivalent. Let's assume that the next generation is even roughly even in terms of pricing. Let's say that the RTX 4080 or whatever it ends up being called costs, let's say, 700, 800 bucks. That's still a lot of money. And so there's a reason, of course, that the RTX 3060 or 3070 or whatever else is so popular. And so with those kind of more affordable mid-range GPUs, ray tracing is still something you can do on those cards, but to really run it in higher performance, you do need upsampling. It's that simple, and I think it's going to be of critical importance, paramount importance going forward. And consoles too. At the end of the day, the Xbox Series X, the PlayStation 5, they're very powerful machines. They really are. But they are also not infinite wells of resources. The hardware is fixed spec. So obviously smart usage of that hardware is incredibly important, and being able to upsample from lower resolutions, or even if you're not using it from ML, let's say you're using something like checkerboard rendering, which is kind of a dirty term I know in gaming, but at the end of the day, the visuals look very good. For example, Horizon Zero Dawn on the PS4 Pro. With that said, hopefully you have found the video useful. If you did, then of course subscribe to the channel and also click the bell icon, and definitely leave a like on the video because, well, it's YouTube land. With that said, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.